I just wanted to share the genesis and the somewhat unusual processes by which this book emerged. And it started really with the previous novel, Three Dreams in the Key of G. When I signed the contract for that to be published, it was going to be 2 years before it actually hit the shops, which meant I had a sort of a long lead-in time where nothing would happen on it. And I didn't want to let that time go to waste. I wanted to write something. But at the time, I was struggling to come up with an idea for another novel because Three Dreams itself had been written quite a long time before it found a home. And I'd been writing short stories and flash fiction, but I hadn't really sort of come up with any ideas for a novel. And it coincided with a time when I was seeing a careers advisor for my day employment. And I was doing that because I'd always worked in such a way that left me time to write on the side. So I'd always worked with numbers, with sort of finances, because it left the sort of the word side of my brain clear for weekends and evenings to write. And also I'd made a decision whereby I didn't want to get a job associated with writing but wasn't writing fiction, be it copywriting in advertising or speech writing or journalism or whatever, which are all, first of all, they're all very different writing skills, and I'm not sure I could have done them. But also I felt emotionally that would be sort of near to sort of being in the publishing world, but not actually in it. It would be sort of adjacent, and I always sort of expressed it as being like a kid outside a sweet shop looking through the window in, but unable to sort of have any of the sweets. And I didn't, emotionally, I didn't want to do that. So I wanted something completely separated, which is why I did numbers work, and still do, in fact, do numbers work. And it suited me because I was the main rearer of our children, which is where both Three Dreams in the Key of G and Stories We Tell Our Children, as per the title, emerged from. So both the jobs that I had over that period were part-time, which allowed me to do the child rearing. And you know, once the children were of an age where they were a bit more sort of independent, it allowed me to sort of write. And that meant that the jobs that I was doing became quite difficult, really, because although they were important just to sort of provide the means to sort of clothe and house and feed, I was finding it increasingly hard to sort of stick with them because they weren't nourishing me in any way, because I sought my nourishment from rearing the children and from being able to write. And the kids were approaching an age where they were going to flee the nest for university. So my whole structure really was going to change from a sort of triangle of child rearing, writing, day job. So that the child rearing, though it never fully disappears, but shrinks. The writing was the writing, but I was struggling to come up with a novel. And the day job was consuming a lot of negative energy in that it was becoming more and more of a struggle to sort of be enthusiastic about it, which is why I was seeking careers counselling. I felt I could now change my line of work, and also I would now, for the first time, countenance actually working with writing in parallel with my novel writing. So this is why I was seeing a career counsellor. And we went pretty deep into the sort of, you know, my entire history, you know, exploring that triangle and what elements fell into it and stuff. And in doing so, and you just relate things of your life, I sort of went home from these sessions and made notes on some of the things we talked about and realised that there were 5 or 6 events, I suppose, that I narrated in those sessions that I then set down on paper from my own life, both as a child but also as a parent to children. And I thought, okay, you know, this is interesting, but I don't want it to be a collection of short stories. This has to be a novel. So I thought, how could it possibly progress from these sort of reasonably disparate, although obviously because they were all part of my personal experiences, they were linked somehow, at least in that the same person had experienced them. But how could I go from there to a full-fledged novel? And also, did I have any more personal experiences that I could, you know, put into this structure? And I'd done a reading a live reading in a venue in central London, but it's in one of those odd parts of London which has a tube station serving it, but it's a one-stop line, so it runs between that station and a mainline station, and there's no other stops, which means the trains are few and far between. And I stood on the platform after the reading that I'd done, and I wasn't particularly directing my thoughts anywhere, but into my head came a story which was based on the Cinderella tale. And as often, I stood there and I was sort of composing it. And when the train finally came, I wrote down what I'd composed in my head. And I got home and I thought, yeah, this can be added to the six, stories that I've already got. And if I can do more of these cast purely from my imagination, i.e. not from my personal experience, although there are always little details that one feeds in, but the essential core of those stories are not something I've experienced directly in my life. If I can come up with more of these, then there's the potential for a novel, but again, they have to be linked. And I had a very sort of frenzied period of writing thereafter, where I was coming up with all these stories. And gradually I realised that's what they were about. They were about storytelling and the stories that we feed our children and the types of books we are exposed to and the type of narratives that are not literary narratives, such as advertising, such as sort of the strange chemistry between boy band promises and their, prepubescent girl fans, of ballet, of jigsaws, all this sort of stuff. And then I more formally, as I went along, I started thinking about the elements of story, such as genres, science fiction, detective fiction, how they work, and how that might feed back into how we see the world. Then there were sort of specific elements of sort of narrative structure, such as what is the concept of a hero that we have in books? How does that translate to the concept of hero in society? And how does that work for a young child, What does the concept of a hero mean to them? So that's how the book coheres. So it had a very strange, as I say, genesis coming out of a sort of a careers talk, which had nothing to do with writing, but just that sort of mere sort of process of self-reflection led to personal material. And then I'd sort of exhausted that in terms of what fed into the book. And it was sort of, but obviously my mind was then whirring about, okay, these are based on specific experiences. Can I conjure more? Sort of feeding off them, but not necessarily starting from my personal experiences. And that's how the book emerged.